Welcome back. Adjustable rate mortgages have fallen out of favor for potential homebuyers or current homeowners seeking to refinance. David Wycombe of eLending Now says secondary lenders don't want adjustable rate mortgages in their portfolios because of uncertainty in the lending market.
If you look back to the housing crash, that didn't necessarily follow suit there, but they learned their lesson or potentially learned their lesson from that. And so the uncertainty of what's going to happen in the future with interest rates, I think, is the biggest factor on why ARMs are just not competitive right now.
Wycombe says many adjustable rate mortgages currently have a higher starting interest rate than fixed mortgages.